not just what are my symptoms, how do I get rid of it? And based on the way that your own immune system that you literally inherited from generations past will decide how you get rid of it. So one person who gets exposed to mold will quickly be able to eliminate it. In other words, the body is attempting to expel it quickly so it doesn't become incorporated into your cells.
Are you struggling with low energy, weight gain, hormonal imbalances, or heavy metal and mold toxicity? Do you want to learn more about anti-aging tips and creating more longevity in your life? Well, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Jen Heller, a wellness educator, infrared sauna expert, and home health consultant. In this podcast, Homes That Heal, I will teach you how to transform your home into a health and wellness sanctuary. Your health is your wealth, and I believe that your home should be your sanctuary space, loaded with the tools you need to thrive in your life, not just survive. If you want to feel fantastic and transform your life and home, grab a pen, let's dive in and create a home that heals. Hey friends, Jen here. Welcome back to another show of Homes That Heal. Today, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Thom to the show, and we are going to walk through literally over 50 years of his expertise in the medical industry. Dr. Thom, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
This is such a delight for me today because I think, as I said, we have so many things that we can talk about, but really I want to first just introduce you and the vast amount of knowledge that you're bringing to my community today. And I'm so grateful, but you have over 50 years, 55 years, is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
55 years in the medical industry. You have a focus and expertise on naturopathic medicine. You're a doctor, a teacher, a lecturer, and you've been recognized for your work and dedication in just the healing power of nature, which I love. And I love that we're, as a collective consciousness, feels like we're circling back into more basic natural health. You're the author of 5 books: Food Intolerances, Homeostasis, Trauma, Disease, Brain Health, Autoimmune. You currently have a practice in Scottsdale, Arizona. You and I align with our firm belief that wellness truly stems from a holistic approach of spiritual, energetic, emotional, physical healing. And so again, I'm so honored to have you join me on the show today and introduce you to my community.
I look forward to the conversation and hopefully providing some information for your listeners.
Yeah, I have no doubt. So I think just to get started, how did you step into this work in the 1970s?
I'd always wanted to, ever since I was a little kid, I said, oh, I'm going to be a dentist. So when I was in dental school, I met my wife, who I've now been married to for 52 years. And she was entering dental hygiene and she had just got over mono. And that was okay. So she was illness. So anyway, we went out and a couple of years later we were married. But it seemed that she had one health problem after the other as a very young woman. And in the first few years that I practiced, it seemed I spent half my time taking her to a doctor's appointment for what seemed, it's like, oh, it was chronic allergies, and then it was chronic PMS, and then it was headaches, and it went from one thing to another. And I think over many years, she probably saw 50 different physicians for this, that, and the next thing. Everybody's sending her to a specialist, try this, try that, because medicine was very different in the 1970s. In fact, in the 1970s, they didn't know what the problem was. Everybody had hypoglycemia. So that was the disease du jour, per se. And we can talk about what happened with each decade as time has gone on. So anyway, after about 5 years, one of the doctors said, it's got to be mental emotional. There's nothing wrong with you physically. We just think you need to go see the psychiatrist. And they actually set her up with an appointment with the mental hospital at the time in the city where I was living. And the appointment was to be December 7th, 1979. And I remember it well because on the 6th, he said, I can't go because I'm afraid they're going to put me in the hospital and I won't be home for Christmas. I said, okay, well, so anyway, that was to be rescheduled. And then, of course, before we got the appointment, I met somebody else who said, have you ever looked at another way of looking at health other than just going to see doctors? What are you talking about? There's other ways of healing that are in the world. There's homeopathy and there's naturopathy and there's Ayurvedic medicine and there's Chinese medicine. I said, they may have a different approach. And so that was a clue. Maybe there is a different approach. And it started me on my own journey of I should look into some of this. And so after I literally would go to the library, just scan through if the book said health or healing or anything. So I'll read that book. So I probably read a couple of hundred books over a couple of years, just literally about anything. And they all said the same thing. They literally said the same thing in different language. If you don't eat well, if you don't get enough exercise, if you don't get outside every day, if you don't move your body, etc. So I said, this has got to be a more of the clue. What's the problem, as opposed to thinking that you're deficient in some medication over there. Anyway, started me on a journey. I then met another physician. I was living in Canada at the time in Portland, Oregon. We said, you should come to Portland. I can help you out. And so we went to Portland. He definitely identified some areas that were out of balance for my wife. And after that, it was just my desire for learning just dramatically increased. So I was practicing dentistry, obviously, at the time, and patients would come in, dentists would come in for dental things, but they'd have a migraine headache or they'd have XYZ. And I said, have you ever considered changing your diet? Or maybe you need to do this, et cetera. And so unfortunately, I got in trouble with the dental association because they ended up charging me with practicing medicine because it was providing other advice. And I can assure you that in the 1970s and the early 1980s, when you started talking about silver amalgam, that was a no-no, which is what I started doing. And became a very loud spokesman that I think we were making a huge mistake in putting amalgam fillings in people's teeth in the early 1980s, per se. And I basically, for all intents and purposes, got blackballed by the association. I lost my license. I was told I couldn't practice anymore because I was basically going against the entire profession. So anyway, it was like, so I sat back and I said, well, what am I going to do, per se? And in 1982, I found out that, oh, there's another school in Canada, the School for Naturopathic Medicine. I think maybe I should go and find out more about that. So anyway, that was started the journey in 82. I graduated from there, but it wasn't enough. So I decided I'd go to Portland, Oregon, and I graduated again. So I have a DDS, an ND, and an ND. And after 11 years in university, my wife said, that's enough. You're done. No more education. So I said, well, I have to self-educate myself. So anyway, that was the journey of how I now have evolved in the last 50 years, seeing everything and change and how medicine has changed. From the 70s, they said it was the era of the hypoglycemia. The 80s was the era of mold when William Crook wrote the book, The Yeast Connection. Then we got into the 90s, and then it became chronic fatigue syndrome. Then it became fibromyalgia. Then in the early 2000s, it became Lyme disease that everybody had if you didn't have an order. And then more recently, what you mentioned, now it's become mold. Everybody's sensitive to mold, per se. And the reality is there isn't any difference. They're all the same thing. There isn't any difference in any, no matter what the problem is. Those are triggers. They're not the problem. The issue is, why is somebody who gets exposed to heavy metals? Why is somebody who gets exposed to mold? Why is somebody who has blood sugar dysregulation or yeast, whatever, because they took a birth control pill or ate sugar at some point in their life? Why do they develop yeast problems? Those things that we look at in medicine are definitely problems. They can be identified and they can be supported and managed. But what I've come to find now in the last 25 years is, if you just try and treat that, you're still missing the opportunity to truly understand what the problem is. So my belief is that, we inherit what the word that I use is called terrain from your great grandparents, your great your parents, etc. And that means, and it's not just about genetics. You actually inherit the reason that you have the job that you do. It's your temperament. Hippocrates talked about it 2500 BC. Shakespeare talked about it in every play. All his characters were of different temperaments. So the reason that somebody wants to be a policeman or a doctor or a politician is an ingrained part of your temperament. The reason you like certain foods is predetermined. It's because your temperament, because of your temperament. The reason that people who get exposed to mold, if you expose 10 people to the same mold, why don't all 10 get sick? Is because you have a different ability of your immune system to be able to deal with that particular mold or heavy metal, mercury, whatever it is. And so my exploration of medicine became, so how do we treat these people? So if I have 5 people who have mold toxicity, I have 5 different ways of approaching it. because if I approach them all the same way, probably only one of them will really get better. And the other one's, I got it better, but not really. There's still a problem. So then they go find another doctor who says, maybe you'll find the problem. So what I found is you have to totally individualize the approach to each individual person by really understanding everything about them, not just what are my symptoms. And I would say the most common symptom of any type, for lack of a better word, toxicity, and I'll call mold toxicity, heavy metals a toxin, pesticides a toxin, polluted air a toxin, the wildfires in Canada a toxin, et cetera, for what's going on. So what ends up happening is that when the body gets exposed to that, the word that I used, the organ, our metabolic systems looks at it and says, is that you or is that not you? Do I need you? Do I need you to survive? Is this something that's essential for my support, for my survival? If it isn't, then I got to get rid of it. How do I get rid of it? And based on the way that your own immune system that you literally inherited from generations past will decide how you get rid of it. So one person who gets exposed to mold, for example, will quickly be able to eliminate it. Maybe they'll get diarrhea. Maybe they'll get a skin rash. Maybe they'll start having bad asthma. In other words, the body is attempting to expel it quickly so it doesn't become, I'll say, incorporated into your cells. People who have of a different nature of how their immune system works, and then what I'm talking about is what, in homeopathic terms, is called miasm. And so there are four main miasms of what you have. And so a very common one, especially among women, and I could say, I'll ask a female, I said, tell me what your menstrual cycle was like when you started. And the typical story that I've heard is I started at age 12, 13, 14, whatever. How was it? Oh, it's terrible. What did you do? I had to take the XYZ for pain relief. Then what did you do? After a couple of years, my mom took it to the doctor. She said, go on the birth control pill because it'll help regulate your cycle. You're not doing it for birth control. No, it's regulate for my cycle. Okay. So anyway, you go through that story. So there's some initial, typically pelvic problems, I'll call it. And then you ask them, what was it like when you were a little kid? They said, oh, I had sore throats all the time. In fact, I had my tonsils taken out, or I had chronic ear infections, or I had chronic sinus infections. I say, well, I already know the way that you eliminate is you don't eliminate. So in other words, the body doesn't have the ability when it's exposed to mold or mercury or zinc or whatever, it doesn't know what to do with it. So it encapsulates it and it puts it places. And the most common places it puts it is either in your throat or in your woman and a pelvic organ. And so when you get exposed to mold, it says, I don't know what to do with you. I don't know where to go. So for one woman, if it's a woman, a mold exposure may end up being more menstrual issues, maybe infertility, maybe ovarian cysts, maybe fibroids will grow, or they'll start getting breast cysts. They'll have more fibrocystic breasts, or they'll start getting a recurrence of sinus type problems, whatever. Another person who has a different way of eliminating, basically, instead of that, a different miasm, we call it, for how they eliminate, is they don't hold on to it. They don't grow things. So in other words, we call it like you grow a cyst, you grow a fibroid, are typical examples. So other people, instead of doing that, they'll get an ulcer. So those people will get exposed to mold, and instead of having a fibroid or an cyst or a sore throat or whatever, or brain fog, whatever, they actually get the gastric ulcers. And suddenly you go to the doctor and he says, oh, you have an ulcer. You're under a lot of stress. And say, oh, must be stress. And oh, yeah, everybody has stress. So it's easy to say, oh, it must be stress. So here, take this antidepressant. Oh, for your ulcer, we'll do this. But it doesn't deal with the problem because the mold you need to identify what the mold is in order to minimize it. You got mold in your house, you got to move out of your house or get rid of the mold. But in the meantime, that doesn't solve the problem because you still have this underlying predisposition. Because the next time you get exposed, if you don't deal with the reason that you have it, you will just get it again. And so you're constantly having to chase it. You're constantly having to treat it. And what I've come to believe is when you identify the way that a person responds to anything foreign, when you balance that, the body doesn't care what you get exposed to. And it's very capable of dealing with it in a healthy way. That's when the person has adapted, we'll say, the day-to-day healthy lifestyle, meaning they're drinking enough water, they're well hydrated, they're eating foods that are ideally, to me, the best diet for anybody. It's what we call the temperament diet. which you can read a book on temperament and it'll say, if you're this particular temperament, these are the foods. They say, yeah, these are the foods. And one of the ways I always know, and often when I see a patient, they're never in their own temperament because the body naturally is going to gravitate to something that makes them feel better. So why is chocolate such a commonly enjoyed food? Not because it just tastes good. In fact, when a person is in balance, if they're not that, typically that's a melancholic temperament. If they're not that temperament, they actually will not like chocolate. And they may have loved it, and then suddenly they're in balance, and suddenly I don't really like it anymore. Or somebody says, I used to love eating steaks or red meat. I don't really like red meat anymore. Why not? Because it's not the right food for your temperament. And that's a sign that you're actually moving your body into a much more balanced state. And when your body is in balance, it pretty much has the ability to tolerate anything. And so acutely, and no matter what it is that you get exposed to, the body will go through some form of a reaction, whether you get a cold or you create some type of an inflammation in your body per se, which then is a discharge, which gets it out of the body, because as long as we can get anything out of the body will heal very quickly. The body has the ability to heal itself if we provide it with the right tools. I always tell patients there is no such thing as an incurable disease. There are only incurable patients who are not willing to do what they need to do in order to get better, because being healthy is a hard job. It's not easy. There's no magic pill. You actually have to work at it, and you have to work at it until you don't want to be healthy anymore. So it doesn't mean that one day when you're eating foods that are the right for you, it doesn't mean you can't deviate. I call it the 80-20 rule. If you do the more or less what your body requires 80% of the time, your body has no trouble dealing with the other 20%. So you go to a birthday party, you go to an anniversary, you go on vacation, you may have a couple of alcoholic drinks that you don't normally do at home, or you eat foods that are not, you don't typically eat at home. The body has no trouble dealing with that. It may not be amusing to the patient, but it was amusing to me. Back in the 80s, when people were all having this candida stuff, and they'd say they'd walk, I tell them to walk by the bakery and eat a donut and get sick, and allow the body to see that this isn't the worst thing in the world. And because they were avoiding everything, and they became like COVID, where they isolated themselves. They couldn't go anywhere because everywhere they went, they think they were getting exposed, which was making them sick. And so somewhere in there, we have to look at the mental, emotional aspect as well as the physical aspect, as far as how somebody does get ill, but more importantly, how do you get better? What can you do at home in order to get better? And there's lots of things you can do at home, but it's a job. And people say, often my patients, when I see them first, they say, wow, I said, I know, I'm just giving you a new full-time job, which is to look after yourself. So I hope you are able to designate at least 20 minutes a day to yourself, regardless of taking your kids to ballet or the baseball game or the soccer game or soccer or whatever you're doing. You need to spend some time on you. You need to look in the mirror and say, what am I going to do for that person today? How am I going to help you feel better today? With all the duties that we have, from going to work and groceries and making meals, and our life is like that. And people will say, I need 25 hours to complete everything that I'm supposed to do. And there's a great video called 23 and a half hours by Dr. Evans. And it's one of those things where he talks and somebody's drawing sort of a cartoon thing. And it's about 8 minutes long. So about 4 minutes, you don't know what the hell he's talking about. He says, this is the greatest thing that ever happened in medicine. It's too bad we haven't patented it, and it'll do this. If you do this, it'll do that, and you won't have this. You have better energy. And what the hell is he talking about? And halfway through, he says, it's walking. If you spend half an hour a day walking, you'll see this. He says, so I don't care what you do for 23 and a half hours, but half an hour a day, devote it to yourself to go for a walk. And he listed all kinds of studies and that in Japan and et cetera. And it is true. We now know you don't necessarily have to go to the gym, but you do have to move your body. And it's something that literally, short of some specific health challenges, most of us, and it doesn't matter how far you go, you don't have to, it's not a race. This is, if you go to the corner and come back and it takes you half an hour, great. You did exactly what you needed to do. So it's almost too simple, for people to realize that it could be so powerful. And because people often want, there must be something that's sexier or something that's more dramatic, or I must have to do something else. And I tell people it's not so much what you take, it's what you do that will have the greatest impact as far as starting to feel better as far as your health is concerned in general. We have these basic laws, I'll call them. The first thing you have to do, of course, is to breathe. And I would say most people don't know how to breathe and don't breathe properly. In fact, literally just before we started talking, I just read an article that most people don't know how to breathe, and it's a huge impact on mental health. And how do you not know? How can you not know how to breathe? And we do a little test called the Bolt score, which is just have somebody breathe normally. They breathe in, they breathe out, pinch your nose, and then just wait until you feel you have to take another breath. This isn't about how long you can hold your breath. Just when are you starting? What do you feel? You're uncomfortable. Your brain's thinking. Your heart's beating. What happened? And then you start to watch, and how long was that period of time? And so the goal is that period of time is 40 seconds. I haven't had a patient be able to get the 40 seconds yet in a long time. In fact, the shortest is 4 seconds, which means, and we think we breathe to get oxygen. We actually don't. We breathe to get rid of carbon dioxide. And in 1900, the average person only breathed 6 or 7 times a minute, which is all we needed to do. But yet the average person is breathing 16 to 18 times a minute. So why are we breathing so much? Unfortunately, it's this cellular toxicity. There's an internal cellular toxicity in our body that has accumulated over the last century, probably more than 1 century, for what's going on. And as you retrain your brain and as you retrain your ability to breathe without thinking about it, without having to consciously take a deep breath, so I have patients do it on an ongoing basis of throughout the day, put up little signs that says breathe, which means you have to stop, look at it, and think about it. And so for the next minute, take 5 breaths. And there's so many different styles of breathing, whether you have to go to a yoga person to learn how to breathe properly, because many people can't move their diaphragm. And if you can't move your diaphragm, you can't actually expand your lungs. You can't basically massage your liver, literally, because when you take a deep breath in and out, you could move it 2 or 3 centimeters. And literally, when you breathe down, you're actually pumping your liver, which is your main detox organ that we have in our body. So there's so many things like that. And then there's exercises to learn how to improve your Bolt score. And breathing now is almost, and I'm sure you could find 100 different breathing apps on the web, and some of them don't work for an individual. They like you tell somebody to do box breathing and they freaks them out. They have an anxiety attack per se. Alternate nostril breathing. There's so many different styles. You have to find the style that works for you. And when you do, oh my God, it makes such a big difference. So if somebody's feeling anxious or whatever, just slowing down, closing your eyes, taking control of your breathing is an amazing way to actually just calm your system down in general. So breathing is it is the most important thing. And I was surprised myself to learn that in the last CPR class that I took last year for my renewal, the paramedic said, you actually, if you literally were to take a full deep breath and then not breathe again, and your heart was working, you have enough oxygen for 8 minutes, like from one breath in your body. It's like people think, why am I breathing 16 times a minute then? Which means I'm breathing every 4 seconds. It's like 8 minutes worth. It's because of the CO2 and this internal toxicity of your cells that can't get out. So it's trying to get out of the body because we can't use CO2. It's literally a poison to our cells. And so the other thing that I found has happened of why people are sensitive to, once again, mold or heavy metal or pesticide or whatever it is, there's chemicals. We're going to have a patient who is a hairdresser. She just found out she's sensitive to many of the chemicals at her salon, which is a real problem because do I have to close my salon or do I find different products? So the aspect is that, okay, so one of the challenges, yes, you're sensitive to these. So the focus of our treatment is to try and improve I'll call it cellular respiration. How do you get oxygen into the cell? How do we get waste products out of the cell? if you have mold accumulated in your body, how do you get rid of it? So people say we take binders and we do this and I take this product and I do that test, et cetera, et cetera. It's okay, that will help. But what I have found is, and even more so in the last months, is overall, by the method of testing that we do in our clinic, is that people are deficient in electrons. And so just if you're running a laptop computer, if you haven't plugged it in a while and then the thing comes on your 5% battery, if you don't plug it in, that thing's about to go shut off. And we can go back and look at the work that Warburg did in the 1930s, believe it or not. Believe it or not, he was a Jew in Germany. He worked for Hitler as a Jew, which is like, how's that possible? Yeah. Hitler apparently was terrified of getting cancer. And Warburg his research was on cancer, and he was doing research. And so Hitler said, you find the cure for cancer. And so as a Jew working for Hitler, of all things, he was able to do his research. And what Warburg discovered is that our cells have a specific electrical charge on the membrane of the cell. And the cancer cells have a very low charge, something like a minus 15 millivolts. A healthy normal cell should have a charge of about minus 50 to minus 70 millivolts. And when you have a lower electrical charge, it's hard to get nutrients in and it's hard to get waste products out. So what Warburg said, the way you treat that is you basically add electrons to people. How do you add electrons? I'm sure all your listeners know about grounding now. How do we naturally add electrons is you take your shoes off, you lie on the grass, you walk in sand, you walk anywhere except on pavement that you don't really have electrons because of the rubber that's built into the pavement. But you can pretty much walk on anything and you'll get some natural electrons from the earth, which is one way that our body supplies it. A main way that we get our electrons is from the sun. And the sun basically grows plants. We eat the plants and we get some of the electrons from our food and the plants that we do. You can also purchase a grounding mat to put on your bed or on a chair or put your feet on, etc., to keep adding electrons to your body. and in the clinic, I often find people are quite deficient. So now it's very common. Your listeners are probably also familiar with this PEMF devices, pulse electromagnetic field. And so you can get at-home versions for PMFs. In fact, my daughter just bought one from a place here that's an at-home version that a lot of athletes carry around with them. We have $15,000 machines in the office. You don't need that for your at home. Beamer is the one that some patients, and they're lower. They do provide electrons. They're not as efficient, I'll say, as a professional one, but it does work. But minimally, we got to get our shoes off. And if you've ever watched the Earthing movie, basically said one of the greatest problems as far as health is concerned is when Nike invented the rubber-based shoe, where we stopped getting electrons naturally from the earth and we stopped lying on the ground because there's so much pesticide. And so you go in the park now and says, this thing been sprayed? I don't want to be in this park if walking bare feet if somebody just sprayed a whole bunch of pesticide here. So we have moved so far away from the way our body naturally would heal and naturally cure itself. You mentioned we're trying to get back to it. People are starting to realize we truly need to go back to nature. If you live near a forest and you've just had a thunderstorm, you walk in the forest and say, oh my God, that smells good. That's all those electrons. If you're fortunate enough to live near a waterfall, go and stand up near the waterfall. They say there's something like 100,000 negative ions per cubic centimeter of the mist and stuff that comes down. So no wonder you feel good when you're in that particular environment, because you're soaking in all those negative electrons. So the more you can get these electrons into your body, the more efficient your body is able to eliminate whatever it is that you're trying to eliminate, which ultimately is in the long term. That's what the long-term job is. It's not like you do it for this is not a 12-step program. You do it for 12 weeks and you're done. No, you do this forever. You're always needing to add electrons. You're always needing to hydrate your cells. You're always needing to eat food that are nourishing your cells. You always need to move your lymphatic system, which is probably the system that people say, unless somebody has been ill and had sore throat and they have, oh, what's this? Oh, that's a swollen lymph node. You'll feel them here in your neck, you feel them in your groin, but they're all over the body. where our lymphatic system is our sewer system. And I would say in all honesty, I've never seen a patient with chronic illness who doesn't have a congested lymphatic system. It's like your toilet gets blocked. You keep flushing it, but nothing goes down, and then it starts to overflow. Our body does the same thing. And movement, castor packs, same thing to do at home. Dry skin brushing, something you can do at home, are easily done on a regular basis that can help support your lymphatic system, which is just keeping the body's ability to eliminate to the areas that eliminate. How do we eliminate? We breathe things out like CO2, volatile gases. We have urination. Our kidney is a function. Our colon is a way that we eliminate. Our skin through sweating is a way that we eliminate. And the fifth way that we eliminate is the emotions. We actually eliminate with our brain. And so healthy emotions are a good elimination. So sometimes if somebody's angry, I'll say, you should get a punching bag and get mad at that punching bag. Really do that type of thing. So if these 5 areas work efficiently, you can, once again, you get exposed. Why? And we can don't have to look back too far. Look at COVID. How is it that not everybody died of COVID? Like, why did millions die, but millions didn't die? What's the difference? And I'm sure if they understood it and did a study of the people who passed away and the people who didn't, you could look at which of their miasms they were, and you'll see those are the people that I say very poor eliminators. They weren't able to eliminate the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus when they were exposed. And unfortunately, it just overwhelmed their system and their body could not eliminate efficiently. Their system literally shut down, unfortunately. And so many millions of people, unfortunately, passed away.
Thank you for sharing all of that. All of these components are so intertwined. Two things I want to touch on that you mentioned. First of all, the spiritual component. I've been speaking on that for many, many years. We moved back into the country about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was like this check engine light going off for me. We were living in the city at the time. Shortly after COVID, I had to shut down my wellness center. So when the dust settled, I was literally laying in the grass in my backyard. We've lived in a great community, but you just had a square patch of grass. I'm laying in the grass, looking up at the sun, listening to all of these other noises around me, traffic, dogs barking, all these things. And it was like somebody just came by with a 2x4 and just sprayed upside the head. It was like, you need to get back into nature because my heart and my gut and my body was jonesing for more grass, like more space in nature,
Right.
into the oxygenation of trees. And shortly thereafter, we found a house outside the city, moved. We live on acreage now. And I can't even put into words how different my body and my mind and my heart and our life has improved just by living in the tree. It was like, just by being in oxygenation and then being able to walk outside and mindfully ground and meditate. What sometimes it's for 30 seconds. Sometimes I jump out there for a minute before I jump on one of these calls just to ground and center, stand in the sun, give gratitude, say thank you, soak in whatever earth energy wants to give to me. And then I pop back in my office and I carry on. If I don't have that or if I don't do that, my body lets me know that I'm missing that. And when you were talking about the grounding, and you're probably old enough to speak to this, is years ago, homes used to be dirt floors.
Right. Yeah.
And when you look at that, and then you layer in, now we're standing on all these synthetic materials. And then on top of it, now we're standing on rubber sole shoes. And on top of
Yes.
that, you have people living in apartment homes and buildings where there's very minimal areas of actually earth. And so I love that you mentioned different ways the grounding mats. I have a PEMF chair in my home as well, like just different ways.
Right.
There are all of these opportunities and options for people to get them into their home. That's honestly the premise of my show, Homes That Heal, is to create this harmonious space so that your body can process whatever life throws at you. One question that came up though, and I feel like I know the answer to this, but a lot of my community is asking about this, or there's a lot of conversation around Lyme disease.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm curious your thoughts on that because obviously many feel that it's a tick-borne disease and that you have to get bit by something. But there's also some other chatter and conversation around that's linked into something else. Can you speak to that a little bit, or what is your opinion on that?
So Lyme disease was one of those things that started to come up after fibromyalgia, et cetera. So yes, it is well known that if you've been bitten by a tick, and if the tick potentially carries the spirochete, Borrelia or Echinacea, one of the other ones, that you potentially are susceptible. However, it will come back to the susceptibility again. And so the approach is, being a bacteria, the assumption is the treatment must be via an antibiotic. But there's so many people who've taken antibiotics for years and they're still not any better, which suggests that maybe it's not maybe the antibiotic is not the answer. What are we missing here? What aspect of the body's ability to heal is being missed? And so when you look at mental, emotional, spiritual connections, we already know that your digestive system is pretty much highly connected to your brain. We call it the gut-brain connection. And so you could take Lyme disease, or you could go to Africa and call it malaria, which is also a sort of an intracellular bug from a mosquito bite that people have. In fact, malaria is the most common infectious disease in the world because it affects so many the people in Africa and other continents in general. So I think, in all honesty, spirituality must play a role in all diseases. I think having a belief in something beyond our physical structure, just our physical frame, there's a greater power above it. And I think that's what Mother Nature is. That's what you just described yourself, how you feel different. You got away from what I call noise pollution. And noise pollution is just as deadly for people as mold exposure or heavy metals per se, because it doesn't allow our brain to relax. It doesn't allow our brain to heal. And when there's so much chatter going on in our brain, and since the brain's main function is to act as the orchestra leader as a conductor of the entire orchestra, which is all our organ systems for what's going on, it doesn't know what to do with the spirochete. It says, what am I going to do with that? And depending on what has happened to you before you actually got bit by the tick and got exposed to that, as I said, depending on what your inheritance is as far as your terrain is concerned, if I had the same tick bite 5 people, not all, only probably one would get sick. Why didn't the other 4 get sick? Is because they had the ability to mount their immune reaction, create a reaction, which may not be pleasant because they may get sick or said diarrhea or something, but they get it out. It doesn't get to harbor, it doesn't get to fester per se. And it's when it gets to fester and the immune system is missing. And so if a person is dehydrated, if they haven't moved, if their lymphatic system is congested, if they haven't grounded themselves, if they haven't slept, if they had an argument with their partner, if they're having problems at work, you start adding all these, I'll call them little T traumas up. You add up all those little T traumas, the brain says, I can't deal with all this. And I'm forgetting about this bite that I just got because I'm trying to deal with all this other stuff. Then that literally has the ability to take over. And in my experience, dealing with people who, whether you have chronic COVID or long COVID, they're calling it now, or chronic Lyme, it's like, forget attacking the Lyme. Look at the rest of the things that are not happening. In my experience, anyway, as a physician, that's how I've treated people who come to me who said, I've been treating Lyme for 8 years. And I said, there's no sense doing what you've done for 8 years because it's obviously not going to work. I'm going to look at this differently. And so this would be my approach of how I would like to look at it. And it does involve looking very much in the mental emotional aspect, spiritual aspect, as far as how the body has the ability then to balance itself. And then that by itself, we know our immune systems can get rid of bacteria easy. Our immune systems can get rid of viruses easy. It can get rid of fungi. It can get rid of mold. It can get rid of cancer cells if it's in the right state of balance. And so when you work towards that, which is what my goal as a doctor is, it's not to say, here, you have this condition, take this. It's like, these are the things that will help your body deal with it, which is what your podcast is all about. What can you do for yourself? What can you do at home that will support that level of healing? That's how I think about those types of things. And one thing that was part of this toxicity that you just mentioned, with in addition to noise pollution, that probably is the next thing in the scenario of these decades, it's microplastics.
Yep.
We are exposed to so much plastic. We live in a plastic world, and almost no matter what happens, you're getting exposed. And And I read a few months ago, I think they said we have the equivalent of almost a cup worth of plastic in our body already. It
Yeah.
says, and the body has no idea what to do with plastic. It's like we can't break it down. We don't have the proper enzymes. So it's just going to accumulate. And where it accumulates will be your symptom. If it's in your heart, you'll have a heart problem. If it's in your digestion, you'll have a digestive problem. If it's in your brain, you'll have focusing or brain fog. So depending where it goes, will ultimately produce the symptom. And the same goes for heavy metals, depending which organ it goes to. And so 5 people with the same exposure could present in 5 different ways based on where the body is trying to isolate it as far away from a healthy place as possible.
That's a mic drop, Dr. Tom. That's a mic drop. There's so much there. The plastic thing, that isn't new information. I think we've been talking about microplastics for a long time, but there definitely seems to be a focus lately on the amount of plastic exposure that we have and what are we going to do about that. And I think that's why I don't say people are frantic, is because before the internet or before the Facebook chat rooms and all these different forums, and it's bittersweet that we have this communication center where people can talk and chat and share.
Right.
But on the same token, you've got information flying around everywhere. I would say 9 out of 10 people that I talk to on a daily basis, and maybe you can agree, people are paranoid. They're paranoid. They're in analysis paralysis. They don't know what to do. They know there's so many things to do. There's so many things they should do. And then to go back to what you said in the first 5 minutes of our show, is that we're too busy doing and we're not enough being.
Right.
So the work, the groceries, the sports, the this, the that, like all of that takes priority before the meditation, the journaling, the prayer, the mindfulness, the grounding, all of that gets backburnered because we're too busy running around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to do all the things and be everywhere. And I think that there's a seismic shift happening, and I think that COVID lifted the lid off of it, forced all of us into our homes, and it
Yeah.
forced everybody to look inward at their health and well-being and maybe start questioning some things. Maybe probably the overarching motivation for me to create this show is the amount of people who are like, "Man, I do not enjoy my home. Like it is too small. It's too this. It's too cluttered. It's too chaotic. I don't like my husband. My kids are driving me crazy. Everybody's in the box and now
That's right.
all
You're right.
at once.
You're
And
right.
now it's people are crawling out of their skin to figure out why they feel so anxious and nervous and frustrated. So I think the shift is happening where people are starting to look more inward, bringing some of these basics back, homesteading, growing their own food, looking at all of these things. But again, there's like this paranoia of too much information. Someone coming to you to your clinic, I think you somewhat touched on the foundation, but for my listeners that are like, okay, where do I start? Walk me through when someone comes to the clinic, what are some ground basic questions that you're asking that maybe some the listeners can ask themselves today without actually having to come and sit with you?
So, like any medical practice, we ask the same questions that their family doctor ultimately would ask. You ask about what is their your chief complaint will say their history of present illness, but that's the superficial stuff. In all honesty, the thing that I am the most interested in doing, once you get past all those details of do you sleep and how's your energy and how's your mood and digestion, et cetera, is tell me about your childhood
Mm,
because the childhood, in my experience, is the root of where their problems began. And that's one of the 5 books that I wrote is basically on trauma. And it's not just about adverse childhood experiences, but there's so much knowledge we know about that now that many people, when I ask, I would say 8 out of 10 people initially, if they've just met me, they're like, what do you want to know about my childhood for? I came here because I have migraine headaches. What's that got to do with my childhood? Type thing. So they'll say, actually, it was okay. But by the third or fourth time that I've seen them, suddenly they say, well, yes, my childhood a while ago. My dad was an alcoholic and there was a lot of screaming in the house and there was this and that and didn't sleep. And sometimes we didn't have enough food, but you just came to accept it. And those experiences, and unless somebody has had what I separate traumas into the big T's and the little T's. The big T's being your grandmother died, or somebody was in an accident, something or you moved and you lost all your friends, and they're very memorable. People remember those, but it's the little stuff you don't remember. And it's the little T's that fill your cup up, per se, to the point, and your reaction to those type situations are what I call your learned perceptions. It's how you've learned to respond when your body feels stressed. You don't, as a 4-year-old, you don't know you're stressed. You don't know what that feels like.
Right.
You just know you're afraid, or you're fearful, or you're hungry, or you're mad or angry. And you've learned that by observation of those people around you. And so when you experience that as a teen or as a 20-year-old or as an adult, you have the same reaction without knowing, because it's ingrained in your amygdala, which is the memory area of your brain. And without having to see it, your body reacts. And the one that I often give in my seminars is that when I lived in Portland, Oregon, which is known as the city of roses, there's roses everywhere. I don't know why this patient lived in Portland, because she was allergic to roses. Like, why do you live here? You can't go anywhere without seeing them. Anyway, she came in my office. I have no idea why this was, but for some reason, I had an artificial rose in my office. I don't know why. The person looked at it and had an anaphylactic reaction. I said, "There's no pollen here. This is not even a real plant." But it was a trigger in her memory that when she actually had been exposed to roses, she had an actual severe anaphylactic reaction to it. Just seeing it caused her to have the reaction. That is the type of thing that happens, that we react in a way without knowing why we reacted that way, but it's a learned perception from somewhere in the past. Those, in my experience, are the events that set up the reason that you have XYZ. Why does somebody develop heart disease? Why does somebody develop cancer? Why does somebody develop an autoimmune disease, etc.? Those, in my experience, are actually set up before conception, during pregnancy, and then in those formative years. And we physically and energetically don't, physically, mental, emotionally, maybe physically for sure, women until their mid 20s and men off until they're 30. Literally, so you wonder why a teenager will do something. Say, "What? Why would a teenager?" That's why 16-year-olds pay a lot of insurance, because they say, "Oh, they're immature." They are immature because they haven't developed a very important part of their brain yet. We say it hasn't totally myelinated, so they don't have the ability to make the same decisions that you would as a 25 or a 30-year-old. And so the 5-year-old can't make any decisions because they're literally doing with this rudimentary brain that has yet to grow up and we get exposed. It literally takes into your 20s till your nervous system is fully mature, which is like, oh, I thought it was mature much earlier than that. No, it's in your mid 20s. So literally from the preconception through your mid 20s, you are learning how do you respond to certain situations. So depending what happened to you in all those formative years and when it happened, will pretty much determine. And from the model of anthroposophical medicine, which was Steiner's work, the model of Chinese medicine, we have 7 phases of life that Steiner talked about, Chinese medicine talks about. And depending when the traumas happened, will pretty much determine what type of a problem you have. For example, another very common issue that patients have is irritable bowel. Irritable bowel D now for diarrhea, irritable bowel C for constipation. I can pretty much say that something happened to you between age 2 and 5, 2 and 6. That was the cause of your irritable bowel.
Whoa, I've never heard that before.
That's based on the energetic maturation of that whole organ system, which is your whole digestive system. Invariably, rarely will they actually remember what the event was. They'll say something happened, but it actually is rarely one, because it's usually the little t. It's a series of things. And then they ended up having a period of diarrhea. And so they learned that when they were exposed to whatever this stress or trauma was, they would just have diarrhea. So now when they have it as an adult, they have diarrhea.
Yeah. So how, okay. So between the ages of 2 and 6,
Hmm.
so if you can't remember, I don't remember what happened to me at the age of 2. Does a person have to figure out what that trauma was?
No, you
How do you
don't.
heal it?
You don't have to know what it is. How I heal it is with homeopathic remedies. And I've actually developed, and the book that I wrote is the entire system a protocol, I'll call it, of supporting people and reestablishing and literally reliving different experiences when using specific type of energy medicines, whether it's aromatherapy, color therapy, chakra therapy, flower essences, single homeopathics, et cetera, we're able to literally allow the person to go back into their brain, and it will usually come out as a dream. And they say, oh my God, I had no memory. They'll ask a sister, a brother, or a friend. And now with Facebook, of course, people will go back and I'll say, what happened to you in teen years? So they find somebody there in college. Do you remember this? Oh, I don't remember that. That happened. Yeah. Don't you remember that happened? And so they're getting a re-triggering of that because it's all in there. It's all stored in there. And when you have people with multiple personalities, the reason they have multiple personalities is to get away from the person who was being so traumatized. So they just became another person in the same
Oh,
body.
oh my gosh. That opens up a whole other can of worms, Dr. Tom. Before I forget, can you please, which book of yours are you speaking of that the protocols live? Because I want to make sure the listeners know what that is.
It's the Begin Again book.
We'll be sure to share that in the show notes because I'm sure everyone's like, what's the name of the book? I'm over here. Which book is that? It sounds like it's got the keys to unlock a lot of things. Okay. The multiple personality, that's interesting. Do you want to expand upon that at all?
The worst case scenario are typically the people who are the most traumatized, and I'll say probably physical and or
Mm.
mental abuse. So one of my patients was a multiple personality, and I literally would have to ask her, "What's your name today? Are you coming in as Anne or are you coming in as Jane? Because if you are Anne, you have diabetes. If you're coming in as Jane, you don't have diabetes. How's that possible? Literally, if Anne goes to the lab, has her blood drawn, it'll show that her blood sugar is diabetic. If Jane goes to the lab, draws her blood, the next day, she's not diabetic. And they say, this is not possible. It is 100% possible. That's how quickly the body can change metabolically, which you talked about, how much effect our mind affects our physical entity, including affecting our blood sugar and including affecting your blood pressure, and all these other factors per se could be altered by basically getting into a meditation, journaling, all the things you just talked about earlier, that you
Yeah.
can basically be able to support yourself. The multiple personalities, that's the extreme example, but people say in with women who have premenstrual syndrome, you'll ask their partner and say, oh, it's a totally different person. And they blame the hormones. So it would be interesting to start asking those people. So tell me what happened when you were having your menstrual cycle in your teen years. How did your siblings, how did your mother, were you shunned, or was it accepted? Should be accepted. It's a natural physical occurrence, of course, but not every young girl that was like, oh my God, go and hide. We don't want to talk to you. So they learned to get upset and angry, and it became part of their symptom picture. And it's not just the hormones changing that's causing that. It's a learned perception, in my experience, that is actually resulting in that. And when they start to learn that, suddenly they have their next period and it's, oh, I didn't really have much PMS this month. How'd that happen?
I want to come back to my questions before we wrap up, but what is the one wellness ritual that you're loving right now that you feel could be the most impactful for people to start moving on the right path?
I think the thing that's the most missing in society is movement. For myself personally, of course, I live in Arizona. I live in a beautiful, people think, well, it's too hot here, but I'll tell you, it's, even though it's 110 or something today, it's, you get used to it. But I was my 1,123rd consecutive day of walking at least 3 miles.
Wow.
And people say, how do you do that? I said, it's not hard. It doesn't rain here. I
Yeah.
probably haven't walked 3 times in the rain in over 3 years because it doesn't rain here. It's easy to do. And it's the time I'm alone. I can take my earpods, I can listen to something or listen to nothing. I can listen to music, I can find a chat, I can listen to I can do something that it's just me. I don't
Mhm.
nobody bugs me on the phone. I don't have to talk to anybody. It's just me time. This is a good 45 minutes that I can spend with myself. It's how I start my day. I feed my dogs, I let them out, put my shoes on, and I go outside. I spend 45 minutes to do that. And I have no reason to not do that. I love it. It's a great way to start the day. I'm usually back home before 6:30 or 7. People are just not even getting up yet, and I've already put in a good amount of activity for the day. And whether that's the thing, I personally, I hate the gym. I don't go to the gym. I don't like the gym because I think more people are just there to make it look good. It's like,
Yeah.
great. People who go to the gym, wonderful. I prefer to be by myself out in nature because I can walk out of our neighborhood, I'll call it, into sort of some rolling hills and stuff. And I love that. I like to see the rabbits and the coyotes, and I don't like to see the rattlesnakes, although I've seen a few. There's a few javelinas here too that I've walked
Yeah.
into.
I
Bob
stay out.
a few weeks ago.
Yeah, my husband and I were just in Arizona last week, and I didn't even really think about the rattlesnakes. And we were hanging out with some friends the first night we got there, and they were talking about their hike. We were actually hanging out in Scottsdale, and they said, "Oh, we ran into this rattlesnake," and I thought, "Whoa, okay, I'm from Wisconsin. I did not think about that. I did not consider that, but thank you for that reminder." And she's like, "Yep, you gotta
Yeah.
you're wherever you just be mindfully aware." And so
Yeah.
for the rest of the trip, I was like, not paranoid by any means, but just paying
Yeah.
attention.
You pay when you live here, you pay attention because it
Yeah.
happens. So, yeah.
And I loved the heat. I'm with you. I see why people love Arizona.
Mhm.
That heat, I'm a heat warrior all day long. I love the heat.
Yeah.
But there's a difference of feeling in that heat versus, say, Florida or the East Coast
Oh,
humidity.
yeah,
But the
totally.
heat felt fantastic on the body. And yeah, we were up early every day, sun up, and got out. Even walking in the middle of the day, everyone's, "Oh, it's 100 degrees out." It felt fantastic for me. Stay hydrated, move a little slower. You feel a little bit wiped out by the end of the day, or towards the end of the day, you're ready to rest, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I felt fantastic. What's your favorite space in your home, or favorite thing you like to do from a healing or health perspective inside your home?
I don't know if it's inside, but it's just outside because I love to sit on we have a back patio. Yeah, it's very quiet. I don't have to interact with the neighbors. I'll read a book, I'll look at something. It's totally quiet time.
That's
For
awesome.
me, that's probably, my wife doesn't even come out and bug me. She doesn't ask me anything. The phone rings, I don't hear it, I don't pay attention to it. So it's like when I walk, when I'm actually in the house, that's
Mhm.
my favorite place is just sitting outside on my back patio.
I'll allow it considering that my deck and my patio is I consider an extension of my home, and that's actually
Okay.
one of my favorite spaces as well, is just be outside in the nature and
Yeah.
just relaxing and restoring. Thank you again, Dr. Tom. This is very enlightening to say the least, and I appreciate your wisdom and your dedication to working to raise consciousness and awareness to all of these different ways that we need to get back to basics, get back into nature, get back into being. Where can the listeners connect and find you if they want to reach out? I know we'll have your books in the show notes and links, but where's the best way to find you?
So I do have a website, drdicksonthom.com. I'm also, my Scottsdale office is at thebiomedcenter.com. If people are looking for that aspect of from a more medical perspective. There's another website that I would encourage people to look at. It's called biomed-drainage.org. They're not selling anything. We're just trying to provide information about this style of medicine, this philosophy of medicine. I've been training other physicians who think this way and practice this way. And so there's people around the country. If you're actually looking for some professional advice, you may find somebody if you're in Colorado or if you're in New Hampshire or Seattle, whatever. There are people around the country who are like-minded, who sort of approach health from this aspect that it's not just about your symptom, but it's trying to understand why you have the symptom. That's what
Mm.
we can help you with. Because I often tell patients, it's like, you're coming because you have XYZ, but I need to share with you. I actually don't treat that. What I do is I treat patients who have that. And if that's what you're interested in, you're in the right place. But if you just want an herbal thing or homeopathic or whatever to treat whatever, I said there's lots of physicians who do that. That's not what my expertise is. I know there's not as many people who practice this style of medicine. In all honesty, I'll be biased. I said it's not easy. It takes a lot of thought. I spend a lot of time with patients. I do a lot of my own intuition. I easily spend 2 or 3 hours after I've talked to a person just to recalibrate, to try and listen to what they said and try and understand their journey. Because if I start to understand it, I can share it with the individual. They start to understand it. And I've had so many people go, I finally get it. I finally understand what you're doing and why I have this problem. And I've had patients after sort of the understanding write their own little, I'll call it autobiography by decades. This is what I had from 0 to 10, from 10 to 20, etc. And then they look at it and they say, I get it. I get why at 45 I started to have this health problem. And now I look at what happened to me in those previous years. I said, yeah, you're actually self-discovery because you probably have heard and many people said, we all have the answer. We don't know how to get it. We don't know how to find what question do you ask your own brain. And sometimes you need the guidance, whether you read it in a book or hear it on a podcast, but you're starting to look in the mirror and saying, what can I do for you today? How can I help you today? As you're looking at that person. And hopefully the thing is, as you said, journal, meditate, walk, drink water, eat well, etc. Take time for yourself every day, even if it's a few minutes. You mentioned yourself that you'll go out and ground yourself. I tell patients every hour you should at least stand up and walk around for 2 minutes no matter what you're doing. And so some patients will set their watch. I said, sometimes you're in a meeting and then I'll work, but at least have the consciousness of it. If you close your eyes for a few seconds, and we know by studying with Pavlov's dogs, you can retrain your brain to actually go there. And there's some professional athletes that come into our clinic. And I remember there was a professional baseball player, this is 3 or 4 years ago, that basically was injured before. He couldn't do his typically training workouts. And I know Olympians do this too. So basically what we said is just go sit, close your eyes and go through the same workout without doing it. And they found the Olympians were stronger without actually doing the workout, just by mentally doing the workout.
That's insane. I know our mind is a very
Yeah,
powerful tool.
very.
We underestimate it. I don't want to say it's not that hard, but I have said the most important meeting I'm going to have today is the one I have with myself.
Yeah, correct. Very good. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so again, I think that we just need to get back to basics. And I hope that people listening to this, maybe they're having their own aha moments and are going to look themselves in the mirror a little bit differently. Like I said, I am so grateful for you sharing all of your wisdom today and walking us through this path of how we can restore ourselves and be our own health advocates. We just met today for the first time, which is very fun. But you may or may not know, but I had a stroke 15 years ago in my early 30s. Yeah,
Oh, wow.
flatlined me.
Oh.
Yep, caught me by storm. Couple of things leading up to that. It's not shocking to me now. I get it. I had to walk my own path to figure out how did this happen. A couple of one or two maybe big T's were like, okay, this makes sense. Heavy metals, mercury and lead, mercury amalgams in the mouth, had trauma on the right side brain from a massive explosion when I was a teenager, had damage, inflammation, and then a bunch of little T's that just stacked on top. And it was like, boom, check engine light. There we are,
Right.
So
Very point.
my path of bringing my body back to alignment is like, it's not shocking to me why this happened. What's shocking to me is that it was the environment in which I created that allowed for the circumstances. There was stress, there was trauma. At the time of it, a lot of stress, a lot of little T's had stacked. Environment had changed at that point in time. I was living in the country, different, simpler life, moved to the city, apartment next to all sorts of noise pollution, different water, different air, different everything. And my body was just like not having it. So for me, this is very close to my heart, but just getting back to the basics of looking in the mirror saying, what can I do for myself? What can I do for myself today so that I stop searching out there for all the answers and start looking in here?
Exactly. Right.
So
Well said. That's very well said. And hopefully, as I say, your listeners will take that away because it's the person who's looking in the mirror that's going to give you the most. If you don't advocate for yourself, unfortunately, don't go and look for a doctor who will advocate for you. We're there to try and help you, but we can't do the work for you. You have to
right.
do the work.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we are going to sign off. Thank you so much, Dr.
Okay.
Tom.
My pleasure.
God bless you. Thank you. Okay, friends and fellow wellness warriors, thanks for tuning in today. If this show was helpful and inspired you, please head over to Apple or Spotify to rate, review, subscribe, and follow us, as well as share it with your friends and family. It's a fantastic way to grow the show, expand my reach, and teach others how to create a vibrant life they love. If you're ready to invest in your health and purchase a Clear Light sauna, hop on over to jenhellerlifestyle.com and send me a note. Thanks again for tuning in. I love you. I'm grateful for you. And I thank you so much for your support. You are the reason I do this work. You are the reason I do this show. And you are the reason I get up every single day with a burning desire in my soul. Cheers to your health and happiness, my friends. We'll see you next week. This podcast is for general information purposes only and is not intended to be substituted for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you think you have a medical condition, consult your licensed physician.